The human heart is not a blueprint. You can't draw straight lines across its chambers, calculate the load-bearing weight of a promise, or predict how it will settle over time. I learned this the hard way. I, Chloe Everett, who built my life on precision, on the elegant marriage of form and function, watched my own foundation crack with a single, casually delivered sentence. This is not just a story about a failed marriage. It's a story about the demolition that had to happen before I could build something real. It's about the day my husband, Mark, decided our love was a cage, and the breathtaking series of events that unfolded after I, quietly and with the steady hand of an architect holding a wrecking ball's trigger, decided to set us both free. The first sign was the phone. It was a Thursday. I was at my drafting table, the gentle scratch of my 4H pencil a soothing metronome in the quiet of my home office. I was designing a lakeside library, a project that felt like a dream, glass and timber reaching for the water, a place meant for quiet contemplation. Mark had always loved this about me, he said, my quiet intensity. He was the storm to my calm, the spontaneous weekend trip to my carefully planned itinerary. But that Thursday, the storm was brewing silently in his pocket. His phone, which used to lie screen down on the coffee table, was now a permanent appendage. It buzzed with a new, frantic energy. He'd developed a tell, a slight, almost imperceptible turn of his body when he checked it, a shield against my gaze. I dismissed it, stress from his new role as senior sales director. He was traveling more, schmoozing clients, building the brand. His world was one of loud bars, expensed steak dinners, and backslapping camaraderie with people like Jason Miller. Jason, the human equivalent of a neon sign, a perpetual bachelor whose life philosophy was scrawled across his Instagram profile. Why have a favorite when you can have the menu? He was Mark's new guru. That night, Mark was packing our open-plan living room. The setting sun cast long shadows across the polished concrete floor I'd fought so hard for. "You're wearing a groove in the flooring," I said, not looking up from my sketch. "Italian terrazzo isn't cheap, you know." He stopped, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Chloe, do you ever feel stuck?" I set my pencil down. Stuck, like in traffic, because yes, the 405 at 5 p.m. is a special kind of hell. No, I mean in life, in us. The air in the room changed. The gentle hum of the refrigerator suddenly seemed loud. "What about us, Mark?" He took a deep breath, the one he used before a big sales pitch. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, reading. Jason and I were talking." "Always a dangerous start," I murmured. "He's in this dynamic, an open relationship, and he says it's revolutionized his life, brought him and his partner closer. It's about freedom, Chloe, authentic, personal freedom." I stared at him. I searched his face for a hint of a joke, the familiar crinkle around his eyes that appeared when he was teasing me. There was nothing, just a desperate, eager sincerity that made my stomach plummet. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Jason Miller, a man who I'm pretty once tried to pay for a date with Bitcoin, is now your relationship counselor, and his advice is that we should, what? Start swiping right on each other." "It's not a joke," he snapped, his patience fraying. "It's about growth, about experiencing the world as individuals, not just as a unit. It's 2024, Chloe. Marriage doesn't have to be a prison sentence." The word prison hung in the air between us. This home, this life I had meticulously drafted and built with him, was a prison. I felt the first, hairline fracture snake its way across the surface of my reality. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. A strange, cold clarity washed over me. This wasn't a spontaneous thought. This was a proposal he'd been workshopping. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the new vocabulary, it all clicked into a terrible, obvious picture. So I did what no one, least of all Mark, expected. I looked him dead in the eye, my architect's mind already assessing the damage, planning the necessary demolition. "Okay," I said. His face underwent a rapid transformation. Confusion, then shock, then unadulterated triumph. "Really? You're open to this?" "If it's what you need," I said, my voice a flat, neutral tone. "Sure, let's try it." He swept across the room and grabbed me in a hug. "You won't regret this, Chloe. This is going to be amazing for us, you'll see." As he held me, his heart hammering against my chest, I looked over his shoulder at the city lights beginning to twinkle through our floor-to-ceiling windows. My own heart was a still, cold stone in my chest. He thought I was giving him a key. He didn't realize I was just waiting for him to lock himself out. The change was immediate and nauseating. Mark became a whirlwind of self-congratulatory liberation. He downloaded 3 different dating apps, his thumbs a blur of activity. Our apartment filled with the cloying scent of a new, more expensive cologne he'd bought. "Aventus," he announced, as if nomming a conquering hero. He started going to the gym at 6 a.m., his phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline. He was sloppy in his excitement. He'd leave his iPad open on the kitchen counter, notifications from Tinder and Bumble popping up like digital weeds. Jessica, 24, likes hiking and mojitos. Amanda, 26, looking for an adventure. I observed it all with the detached focus of a scientist studying a bizarre new species. I cooked dinner, I worked on my library, I paid the bills. I was the steady, reliable bedrock upon which his new, thrilling life was being built. My sister, Maya, was my port in the storm. 5 years my senior and a sharp-eyed HR director, she saw through people for a living. We met for our weekly lunch at a quiet salad place near her office. "You're too calm," she said, stabbing a piece of avocado. "It's unnerving. I expected rage, tears, maybe a well-aimed stapler." "What good would that do?" I stirred my iced tea. "It would just give him the drama he craves. This way, he's the only one making a spectacle of himself." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Chloe, I've been hearing things." My fork stilled. "What kind of things?" "From Stacy in accounting. She's friends with Brendo in marketing. There's talk about Mark and the new summer intern, Sarah." The name landed like a physical blow. It was so cliché it was almost insulting. An intern. Stacy said they've been seen having very intense, very private mentoring sessions after hours, and that they were awfully cozy at the last company mixer. I took a slow breath, the kind I used to steady my hand before a final ink line. "How old is she?" Maya winced. 23. She has a lifestyle blog and calls kombucha a passion. I pushed my plate away, my appetite gone. So it wasn't just a philosophical exploration of polyamory. It was targeted. He had a specific, shiny new object in mind. The open marriage was just the moral loophole he needed to jump through without being the villain. The anger finally came then, not as a hot rush, but as a deep, freezing cold that settled in my bones. He wasn't just betraying me, he was insulting my intelligence. He thought I was too naive, too wrapped up in my blueprints to see the blatant truth. That night, as Mark regaled me with tales of his fascinating conversations with a yoga instructor named Luna, I made a decision. I would not be the victim of this sordid little story. I would be its architect. And every good architect knows, before you can build, you sometimes have to tear everything down. The demolition began quietly, with Liam. Liam Walsh had been Mark's best friend since college. Where Mark was all sharp angles and loud energy, Liam was solid, quiet, like a well-anchored retaining wall. He was a historical preservationist, a man who dedicated his life to saving beautiful old things from being torn down. The irony was not lost on me. He'd always been a steady presence in our lives, the reliable plus one at parties, the guy who helped us move, the voice of reason when Mark's schemes got too grandiose. I'd always liked him, appreciated his dry wit and the quiet intensity in his green eyes when he talked about restoring a Victorian cornice or a faded mural. The weekend after my lunch with Maya, the shelf in our walk-in pantry collapsed. Cans of tomatoes and bags of pasta lay in a chaotic heap on the floor. "Damn it," Mark muttered, looking at the mess with utter disinterest. "I'll call a handyman on Monday." He was due for a hike with a few friends from work. "I'll handle it," I said. On a whim, I texted Liam. "Hey, our pantry shelf had a catastrophic failure. You're the only person I know who actually understands structural integrity. Any chance you have a spare hour?" His reply was almost immediate. On my way. Tell Mark not to touch anything. 20 minutes later, he was at our door, a worn leather tool bag in hand. He was dressed in a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, a faint smudge of what looked like old paint on his forearm. "Let's survey the damage," he said, his voice a calm, low rumble. He knelt in the pantry, examining the broken bracket, running his fingers along the grain of the wood. I watched him work. There was a reverence in his touch, a careful consideration that was the polar opposite of Mark's chaotic energy. "The problem isn't the bracket," he said after a moment. "The drywall anchor was placed in a weak spot. It was only a matter of time before the whole thing gave way. Someone installed it in a hurry." "A metaphor for my entire life right now," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Liam looked up at me, his gaze sharp and perceptive. He didn't ask what I meant. He just held my look for a moment, a silent acknowledgement. "We'll fix it, properly." For the next hour, he worked while I held the new shelf board in place. We didn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable, filled with the sound of his drill and our synchronized breathing. He smelled of sawdust and fresh air. "All set," he said, loading the last can of soup onto the reinforced shelf. "This will hold for the next 50 years. "Thank you, Liam. I really appreciate it." He packed his tools, hesitating at the door. "Chloe, is everything okay, with you and Mark?" The directness of the question surprised me. I could have lied, offered a platitude, but the genuine concern in his eyes broke through my carefully constructed composure. The air in the master bedroom was thick with the silence of unsaid things. Mark was already in bed, pretending to be asleep, but I could feel the tense energy radiating from him. I moved through my nightly routine with a quiet deliberateness, my mind clearer than it had been in months. The tears I'd shed with Liam had been a final purging of the old life, the old Chloe who believed in the fairy tale she'd built. I slid into my side of the bed, the chasm between us feeling wider than ever, a geological fissure that had opened up in the very bedrock of our marriage. "So, you and Liam are getting pretty cozy," he said into the darkness, his voice tight. I didn't turn to look at him. He's a good friend. He was there for me when I needed someone. And I was. The petulance in his tone was unmistakable. "Were you?" I asked, my voice flat. "You were at a hike, remember?" He fell silent. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, the frantic recalibration. His plan was backfiring spectacularly, and he had no contingency. The following days were a study in his escalating desperation. The dates became less frequent. He'd come home early, hovering, trying to insert himself back into the narrative of our life. He attempted to cook me dinner, a messy, overcooked pasta that was a far cry from the meals we used to create together. He suggest watching a movie, the same ones we'd loved, as if he could rewind time through sheer force of will. "Remember when we saw this at that little indie theater?" he'd say, nudging my foot with his on the sofa. "I remember you checking your phone 3 times during the climax," I replied, not taking my eyes off the screen. He flinched. The problem with giving someone enough rope is that they eventually start to feel the noose tighten. He was realizing that the freedom he'd craved was a two-way street, and I was already miles down it. My friendship with Liam, meanwhile, deepened into something more profound. It was no longer just about shared solace or a mutual appreciation for craftsmanship. A current of something new, something electric and terrifyingly wonderful, ran beneath our every interaction. We started meeting for coffee in the mornings before work at a small, sun-drenched cafe tucked between 2 skyscrapers. It became our neutral territory, a place untouched by the ghost of Mark. "The client wants to put vinyl siding on a Queen Anne Victorian," he'd groan, stirring his cappuccino. "It's architectural blasphemy." "Tell them it's like putting a tracksuit on a queen," I'd laugh, and the sound felt foreign and beautiful on my lips. He'd tell me stories about the buildings he saved, his eyes alight with a passion that was both fierce and gentle. I'd show him my progress on the library, and he'd pore over the plans with a reverence that made my heart ache. He saw the soul in my work, the intention behind every line. One Saturday, he took me to see his current project, a dilapidated 1920s firehouse he was fighting to save from developers. The air inside was thick with dust and history. Sunlight streamed through broken windows, illuminating the soaring ceiling where fire poles once stood. "Look at this," he said, his voice echoing in the vast space. He ran a hand over the intricate brickwork around the main door, his touch as gentle as a caress. "Hand-laid, every brick placed with a purpose. You don't see this anymore." I watched him, standing in a shaft of light, his passion for preserving beauty a tangible force in the room. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was falling in love with him. It wasn't a dramatic, heart-pounding frenzy. It was a quiet, inexorable shift, like the continents moving. It was the feeling of coming home to a place I'd never known I belonged. As we were leaving, he stopped me at the large, empty doorway. "Chloe," he said, his voice low, "I need to say this. What I feel for you, it's not just friendship. It hasn't been for a while." The world seemed to hold its breath. I looked into his earnest, worried eyes, and I saw my own future reflected back at me. "I know," I whispered. "Me too." He didn't kiss me. Not then. The moment was too sacred, too fraught with the weight of my still-existing marriage. But he took my hand, his calloused fingers lacing through mine, and we stood there in the doorway of the old firehouse, our joined hands a promise of a new structure to be built, on a foundation of truth and mutual respect. The final collapse began with a phone call. Mark's. He was in his home office, and his voice, usually so confident, was raised in a frantic, pleading tone. I wasn't eavesdropping, the door was open, and his desperation was a siren. "What do you mean it's not working for you?" he hissed. "Sarah, we had a connection." "No, don't say that. Was it something I said? A life phase? What does that even mean?" I stood frozen in the hallway, a clean towel in my hand. The mighty CEO, the shiny new object, had ghosted him. The irony was so perfect it was poetic. He slammed his phone down and stormed out of the office, his face a thundercloud. He saw me and stopped short. "It's over," he spat, as if it were my fault. "With Sarah, she said she needed space." He made air quotes, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I almost meant it. I was sorry for the humiliated, broken man standing in front of me, even if he had brought it upon himself. His eyes narrowed, searching my face for mockery. Finding only calm, his expression shifted to something more calculating, more desperate. "You know," he said, his voice softening into a wheedling tone I knew all too well. "This experiment, it's made me realize what's important. You're important, Chloe, us. I think we should close the marriage. Go back to how things were." There it was, the retreat, the coward's gambit. He'd taken his shot, missed, and now wanted to return to the safety of the life he'd derided. I looked at him, this man who was now a stranger to me. I thought of Liam's hand in mine, of the quiet understanding in his eyes, of the future that was waiting for me just beyond the wreckage of this one. I smiled, a small pitying smile. "That's funny," I said, my voice clear and steady in the tense silence of the hall. "I was just thinking, too. I was thinking about how Liam helped me fix the pantry shelf. He's got such steady hands." The color drained from Mark's face. The name, dropped so casually, was a detonation. "Liam," he repeated, his voice a disbelieving whisper. "My Liam." I held his horrified gaze, my own serene and unflinching. "Not anymore." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the ruins of his own making. The echo of my footsteps on the terrazzo floor was the only sound, the final note in the requiem for our marriage. The demolition was complete. The site was cleared, and I was finally, blessedly, free to build. "Mark thinks our marriage is a prison," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "He's requested a commutation." Liam's jaw tightened. He looked away out the door, then back at me. "He's a fool." 2 words, that was all. But they were a lifeline thrown into the icy waters I'd been treading. He didn't give me a pep talk, didn't trash talk Mark. He simply saw the situation for what it was and offered a clear, unbiased assessment. As he left, my phone buzzed. It was a photo from Mark, a blurry selfie of him on a mountain trail, a pretty blonde head visible just behind his shoulder. Sarah, the intern. The caption read, "Nothing like fresh air to clear the head." I looked from my phone to the perfectly level, solid pantry shelf. One was a flimsy, temporary illusion. The other was built to last. The following week was a masterclass in psychological observation. Mark's initial euphoria began to curdle into something needier, more insecure. He was a performer who had grown accustomed to a specific kind of audience, a captive, admiring one. My refusal to play my part left him floundering. He'd come home from a date, buzzing with manufactured excitement, and narrate the entire evening to me as I sketched at the table. "And then she said my taste in wine was refined," he announced, hovering near my elbow. I murmured, not looking up from the stress load calculations for the library's cantilevered section. "You usually just order the second cheapest bottle on the list." He deflated slightly. "Well, she appreciated it. She's a sommelier in training." "How convenient for you." I finally glanced at him. "Did you learn anything about her besides her palate, her family, what she's afraid of, what she reads?" He blinked, thrown. "It was a first date, Chloe. It's not a therapy session." "No," I agreed, turning back to my work. "It's not." The silence that followed was heavier than before. He wanted a reaction, jealousy, curiosity, anything that would validate his new, free identity. My polite indifference was a void his ego couldn't fill. Meanwhile, my connection with Liam grew in the quiet spaces Mark left behind. It wasn't orchestrated. It was organic, a natural settling of two compatible structures. He texted me a photo of a beautifully restored Art Deco facade on a building I'd always loved. "Thought of your library. They knew how to make things beautiful and lasting back then." I smiled, a genuine, unforced smile I hadn't felt in months. "They built with soul, not just for spec," I replied. "How's the cornice repair going?" "It's fighting me," he wrote back, "but I'm more stubborn." Our conversations were a balm. We talked about materials, about the ghosts in old buildings, about the frustration of a client who wants to paint over original brick. It was a language Mark had never spoken, one of craft and permanence. With Liam, I didn't have to explain why I'd spend an hour obsessing over the joinery of a handrail. He just understood. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday. Mark was supposed to be on another date. I was curled on the sofa with a book on Frank Lloyd Wright when my phone lit up with a call from Maya. "He's not on a date," she said without preamble, her voice tight. "Stacy just saw him. He's at the Oak Bar downtown with her, the intern, and it's not a mentoring session. They're in a booth in the back. It's very cozy." A cold calm settled over me, the final piece of evidence. "Thank you, Maya." "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done from the beginning," I said softly. "Stop being a spectator." I didn't confront him. I didn't drive down there to make a scene. Instead, I did something far more powerful. I called Liam. "Hey," he answered, the sound of gentle jazz and rain against windows in the background. "Everything okay?" "Not really," I said, and for the first time my voice wavered. I know where Mark is, and who he's with. I don't want to be alone in this apartment right now." There was no hesitation. "Give me 20 minutes. When he arrived, he was carrying a brown paper bag. Inside was a bottle of my favorite Pinot Noir and a box of decadent pastries from the French patisserie I loved. "Emergency rations," he said, his coat dripping onto the mat. He looked at me, really looked, and his expression softened. "You look tired, Chloe." That simple, kind observation undid me. The walls I had so carefully constructed crumbled, and the tears I had been refusing to shed finally fell. I cried silently, my shoulders shaking. Liam didn't try to hug me or offer empty platitudes. He just stood there, a steady, solid presence, until my tears subsided. He poured the wine. We sat at the kitchen island, the rain streaking the windows like tears on glass. "He's at the Oak Bar with the intern," I finally said, the words tasting like ash. Liam's knuckles were white around his wine glass. "I know." I looked up, startled. "You knew?" "Not for sure, not the details, But I know Mark. I know how he gets when he's chasing something shiny. I saw him with her at a party a few weeks ago. The way he looked at her, it wasn't about an open marriage. It was about conquest. Why didn't you say anything? Because it wasn't my place, he said, his gaze level and honest. And because I hoped to God I was wrong, for your sake. We talked for hours. I told him about the open marriage proposal, about the dating apps, about the feeling of my own life becoming a stranger's. He listened, truly listened, his focus entirely on me. He sees you as part of the foundation, Liam said finally, his voice low and intense. Something solid and reliable that's just there. He doesn't see the artistry. He doesn't see the woman who designed this. He gestured around our beautiful, now tarnished apartment. He's a tourist, Chloe, and you're a landmark he takes for granted. In that moment, something shifted between us. The air grew thick with unspoken things. His hand rested on the counter, inches from mine. I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Our eyes met, and the world narrowed to that single, charged point of contact. The front door clicked open. We didn't jump apart. We simply turned our heads, our hands still achingly close as Mark walked in. He was flushed, his hair damp from the rain, smelling of whiskey and his Aventus cologne. His smile froze when he saw us. His eyes darted from my face, which I knew was splotchy from crying, to Liam, to the 2 wine glasses on the counter. Liam, he said, his voice too loud. What are you doing here? I brought Chloe some wine, Liam said, his tone even. His posture was relaxed, but there was a challenge in his eyes. She seemed like she could use the company. Mark's gaze landed on me, a flicker of confusion and something else, the first faint whisper of panic. Everything okay, babe? The term of endearment felt like a violation. Just a quiet night in, I said, my voice steady as I held his gaze. How was your hike? The lie was a tangible thing in the room, he faltered. It was good, invigorating. I'll bet, Liam said, taking a slow sip of his wine. The 3 of us stood in a tense triangle. Mark, the outsider in his own home. Liam, the calm, immovable guest. And me, the architect, finally ready to draw the final line. Well, Mark said, clapping his hands together, a hollow attempt to reclaim the room. I'm beat. Long day tomorrow. He retreated down the hall toward our bedroom, throwing one last, uneasy look over his shoulder. Liam stayed for a few more minutes, finishing his wine in a silence that was now thick with unacknowledged victory. You should go, I said softly, but thank you for the wine, for everything. He stood, his hand brushing mine as he picked up his coat. A deliberate touch. Any time, Chloe, you know that. After he left, I stood in the silent living room. The storm inside me had passed. I was no longer cold. I was resolved. Mark had gotten his open marriage. He just didn't understand the rules of the game he had insisted we play. And his best friend had just checkmated him without either of us saying a word. The demolition was over. Now it was time to lay the new foundation. The confrontation I had both dreaded and anticipated came the next evening. I was in the kitchen, packing a box with my favorite cookbooks and the ceramic mixing bowls my grandmother had left me. The physical act of separating my life from his was cathartic. Mark stood in the doorway, watching me for a long moment. The anger from the previous day had been replaced by a raw, bewildered hurt. So this is it, he asked, his voice hollow. You're just leaving for Liam. I placed a book carefully in the box. I'm leaving because our marriage is over, Mark. You ended it when you asked for an open relationship to legitimize your affair. Liam is what happens after. He flinched. It wasn't an affair, we had an agreement. I finally turned to face him, my patience wearing thin. You had a target, and you manufactured a philosophy to justify hitting it. Don't insult us both by pretending otherwise. I saw the photo from your hike. I know about Sarah. The entire Oak Bar probably knows about Sarah. The last of his defenses crumbled. The truth, stated so plainly, was inescapable. He slid down the doorframe to sit on the floor, his head in his hands. I made a mistake, Chloe, a huge, stupid mistake. Can't we just go back? The plea was so pathetic it almost evoked pity. almost. "There is no back, Mark," I said, my voice softer now but no less firm. "You can't unbreak this. You wanted freedom from the prison of our marriage. Well, congratulations, you're free, so am I." "I don't want this freedom," he cried, his voice cracking. "You don't get to choose which consequences you keep," I replied. I taped the box shut. The finality of the sound echoed in the room. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll be served with the papers next week." The divorce was, as I'd predicted, swift and clean. My prenuptial agreement, which Mark had signed with a joking eye roll, calling me pragmatic to a fault, was now my shield. He had scoffed at my insistence, but my father, a businessman, had drilled into me. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. Sitting in my lawyer's pristine office, I felt a wave of profound gratitude for my own foresight. "It's remarkably straightforward, Ms. Everett," my attorney, a sharp, efficient woman named Ms. Davis, said, sliding the papers across the desk. "The prenup holds. He has no claim to your business, your assets acquired prior to the marriage, or the appreciation of your separate property. He walks away with his personal accounts and his car. That's it." I signed the documents with a steady hand. There was no triumphant glee, only a quiet, solid satisfaction. Justice, in this case, was not dramatic, it was administrative. It was a series of checkmarks and signatures that legally affirmed what I already knew. I was my own person, and I would be just fine. Mark, predictably, did not take it well. A flurry of desperate, angry texts followed the serving of the papers. "You're really doing this, after everything. You're throwing away 4 years over a phase. Evelyn was never your friend. She used you to get to me." The last one was so ludicrous I actually laughed. I didn't respond to a single one. Silence was the most powerful reply. It denied him the drama, the negotiation, the very oxygen his ego needed to survive. Meanwhile, Liam and I began our relationship in the light. Our first official date was not to a fancy restaurant, but to the restored firehouse, now safe from the developers. He'd brought a picnic blanket and a basket of food, and we ate in the middle of the vast, empty hall, our laughter echoing joyfully in the space he had fought so hard to save. It was easy. It was real. When he kissed me for the first time, under the soft glow of the temporary construction lights, it felt less like a beginning and more like a homecoming. The final thread was tied a month later at my nephew's birthday party. It was held in my sister Maya's backyard, a chaotic, joyful affair filled with squealing children and the smell of grilled burgers. Liam was by my side, his presence a quiet, comforting constant. We were laughing with Maya and her husband when I felt a familiar, tense energy. Mark was standing at the edge of the lawn, looking out of place and uncomfortable, holding a clumsily wrapped present. Maya shot me a look. I didn't invite him. "It's okay," I said, though my heart hammered once hard against my ribs. I walked over to him, Liam a few respectful steps behind me. "Mark," I said, "this is a family party." "I know, I wanted to talk, to see you." His eyes flickered over my shoulder to Liam, and a flash of pure jealousy crossed his face. "Can we please just talk in private?" "No," I said, my voice calm. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." He looked around at the curious faces of my family, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I miss you, Chloe, I miss us. This is all wrong." Liam stepped forward then, not aggressively, but simply to stand beside me, his arm gently brushing mine. A united front. Mark's eyes widened at the silent show of solidarity. "So, you're just replacing me, just like that?" I looked at the man I had once vowed to spend my life with, and I felt nothing but a distant, weary pity. "You replaced yourself, Mark," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the sudden quiet of the yard. "The second you decided I was your backup plan, you didn't want a partner, you wanted an audience for your life. Liam wants to build a life with *me. There's a difference." He opened and closed his mouth, but no sound came out. The truth was a wall he could not scale. He shoved the present into my hands, turned on his heel and walked away, disappearing down the driveway without a backward glance. I stood there for a moment, then handed the gift to my nephew. "Here, kiddo, an extra one for you." As the party's noise swelled around us again, Liam took my hand. "You okay?" I looked up at him, at his kind, steady eyes, and smiled a true, unreserved smile. "I'm better than okay." 6 months later, I stood on the completed deck of the lakeside library, the wood still smelling new under the sun. The glass walls reflected the water, and the structure seemed to grow organically from the landscape. It was my masterpiece. A hand slipped into mine. "Liam." "It's even more beautiful than the drawings," he said, his voice full of pride. "It's solid," I replied, squeezing his hand. "It's built to last." He turned to me, his expression serious and full of love. "Just like us." We hadn't moved in together yet. We were taking it slow, building our relationship with the same care and attention to detail we gave our work. There was no rush. We had all the time in the world. As for Mark, I heard through the grapevine he'd moved to a different city, chasing another fresh start. I wished him no ill will. He was a chapter in my life, one that taught me a brutal but necessary lesson about my own worth. The past was a blueprint, full of lines both true and flawed. But the future was a blank page, and for the first time I was excited to pick up my pencil. I had my integrity, my passion, and a man beside me who valued the soul of things. I was no longer just an architect of buildings, but of my own life, and the foundation now was unshakable.